Good morning. Welcome back to Brighter Morning with Bo. I am Bo Tiwari. Our telephone numbers here are 609-6283. You're welcome to call 609-6284. You're welcome to call on these numbers. You can make a comment or you can ask a question. If I can answer the question, I will. If I can't, I will let you know. But you are welcome to call. We have just been talking with Mr. Kevin Ramnarine, an energy consultant. He is advisor to the energy minister in Guyana now, but he also was a former minister of government responsible for energy. And a lot of the investments that are bearing fruit here in Trinidad and Tobago came in under his watch between 2011 and 2014. I think some of the things that are worth taking from Mr. Ramnarine's contribution are, first of all, we have to settle for a smaller energy economy in Trinidad and Tobago. And the faster we do that, it seems to me the better we can adjust other things. Because we have to take into account not just the fall in revenue because of price and production, but the sustained fall in revenue from energy because of a different configuration of the energy sector. The second thing is that unless political resolution is brought to bear on the situation in Venezuela, and that then increases enthusiasm on the part of Shell to invest in Dragon over there because they have interest in that, and that is likely to be the quicker opportunity of the two in Venezuela. That is unlikely to happen to Trinidad and Tobago, for Trinidad and Tobago, because that is the only real option that we have, because there is no deep water gas now increasing, except for the small increases that we are going to get in 2022 and 2023. The prospects for the next 10 years do not look great. And thirdly, the issues of what are likely to be the investment role of Shell and BP in Trinidad and Tobago over the next 10 years, given their shift in priorities and moving to the point where they are low carbon companies. What does that mean, and what is its implications for gas supply, natural gas supply in Point Lisas and Atlantic LNG, the 4 trains. What are those things going to look like? And also the full implications of Woodside investment in Trinidad and Tobago because of its investment with BHP and BHP's exit from Trinidad and Tobago. I think those are important considerations. Okay, we move now to that energy matter is a very important matter because energy is so critical to the economy. And I hope the Minister of Finance will not come and tell us what he wants us to hear rather than what the facts are on these matters. I think we need to have a realistic view of what's happening in this energy sector and what are the prospects going forward. I think we could do without the whitewash about the NGC. I think the government should come clean and tell us what really happened. If they made a political decision, okay, and then misfired, all right, fine. And we should stop creating the conditions as if it's a problem of the board and NGC when it was a political decision and instruction, and then hiding behind the issue of whether the board should get indemnity or should not get indemnity. This matter of indemnity operates like this. There is corporate law, and the fiduciary responsibility of a board, the chairman and the rest of the board, are to look after the best interests of the company at all times. No matter what, that is what they are supposed to do. If they make a mistake, a miscalculation, a misjudgment, but they were doing it in the best interest of the country, there is nothing wrong with that. They can't be held liable for that. Because in good corporate governance, all that is required of you is your intention to be doing what is right for the company, with the company and the company's interests coming first. Okay? So the indemnity only arises if there is a political instruction and there was dissent on the board or division on the board or concern on the part of the board, and they went ahead and carried out the political instructions anyway. So I want to make that clear for the population of Trinidad and Tobago. We take a caller on the line now. Yes,
Hello?
sir. Sir?
Hello, good morning.
Good morning. Hi.
Both concerning the foreign reserve, they keep saying it has 6.9 billion in the foreign reserve. But does that include, say like they went on the road, they got 1.5 billion US, say about 2 years ago, then you get about, say, 350 million US from WH, all the different people. Doesn't that include all those sort of money in it?
Yeah, well, what the government has been doing with the central bank has been basically when it has loan opportunities in U.S. currency, of course, whatever it draws down goes first to the foreign reserves in the central bank, and that keeps the level of foreign exchange buoyant. And there's nothing wrong with that, but what is wrong with that is pretending that we have more foreign exchange than we actually have, and adding the borrowings to it to make it seem better than it is. So it's a kind of sleight of hand, a kind of deception. And the foreign exchange has to be seen against the balance of trade. As the import requirements make demands on the foreign exchange, you have a depletion effect on the foreign reserves in the central bank. Okay, thank you.
But this is what I'm saying. But is it not factual that the 6.9, what they say we have, the amount they borrow has to be paid back?
Oh, well, there's another matter, which is that the whole HSF, for instance, all the money we have in the HSF, which is almost 6 billion, all of that has to be positioned against the amount of borrowing, which in Trinidad money is upwards of 132 billion. So it's I think, so when you offset the HSF savings against the debt and the debt servicing, and you offset the foreign reserves against the import that we have to pay for every year, that is where you have a problem of the meaning of these numbers of reserves in the in the central bank and savings in the HSF.
Okay, all right. Thanks a lot.
All right then. Thanks for the question. All right, we want to go now to Dr. Arjoon. Is he on? All right. So, Dr. Arjoon, if you are listening, we're taking a break now and we're coming right back to you when the break is over.
Welcome to Lifetime Solutions, where you can trust your roof to us. Our services include custom fabrication, steel framing, roofing installation, on-site roll forming, roofing maintenance and services. Call 223-ROOF or 223-7663 for a quote today or visit our website www.lifetimesolutionst.com. Lifetime Solutions. You can trust your roof to us. Call 223-ROOF or 223-7663 for a quote today or visit our website www.lifetimesolutionstt.com.
Welcome back. This is Brighter Morning with Bo on MCTV, Multicultural TV, and U97.5 Hot Like Pepper Radio, Multicultural Radio. I am Bo Tiwari, your host, and we're glad that you are on, watching on MCTV and listening on U97.5 FM radio. We have Dr. Arjoon on the video now, and we will have a conversation with him. This is Dr. Vaalmikki. Arjoon, he is an economist, a financial economist, and he is at the University of the West Indies Economics Department. Good morning. How are you?
Hi, good morning, Dr. Tiwari, and good morning to all your viewers and listeners out there.
All right. How do you, I mean, I'm going to ask you a non-economic question. Did you look at the newspapers this morning?
I didn't get a chance to, not as yet. After our conversation, I'll try to get my hands on a copy when I go out.
Yeah, just looking at the newspapers, I mean, it is so contentious and so self-destructive, I think, of the country. You can't blame the newspapers. The newspapers are just reporting what is happening.
Reporting what's there, yeah.
Yeah. So it just tells us what is the state of our country, and it's not nice. I think we're in a bad situation here. I had my friend recently, and he said that Ray Holman, he's a panist, but he used to be a teacher at Fatima, and he's soon to get a honorary doctorate from the University of the West Indies. A very distinguished, sensible gentleman and a very gifted panist. Anyway, he was saying that, that he feels that we've reached a point where we can go over the brink, Anyway, we're not here to talk about that. I think we
really feel that way every single day.
Huh?
I think every day when you look at the newspapers or the 7 p.m. news on television, there is that sentiment of many times where persons feel a bit hopeless and lose confidence in the country and by extension the economy. There's a great deal of uncertainty that is happening now, not just from an economic standpoint, but from a standpoint of your overall livelihood.
Well, there's the livelihood issue, all right, the survival issue and being able to keep yourself going. Then there is all the political news, which is really a constant stream of misinformation, I think. And it's very hard to get fact from fiction. And then there are the controversial issues, whether it is the police commissioner or the NGC issues, in which it is very hard to get at the truth. And you have to really pick sense from nonsense to make sense of what is happening in the country. And there's the perpetual spin that is going on in the society. And then there's the reality of what is taking place in the society, which is people don't have jobs, they're not getting the jobs back. Businesses are closed, some of them are not going to open up. The business sector is uncomfortable because basically, as the president of DOMA was saying to me earlier this week, he was saying that when you talk to the government in private, they don't listen. And when you talk in public, you have to be careful because if you alienate them, they become, vindictive. So, I mean, there's that problem. The unions are completely alienated from the process. They are withdrawn from the process. And instead of supporting vaccination, they are supporting the right of people not to vaccinate. I don't know how we're going to get businesses to open and the economy.
You can have let's assume by some miracle the state or the government comes with some excellent economic strategies in this particular budget. There's a good chance it's not going to work unless you have the majority of the country being vaccinated. And something you said earlier just now, about politicians is very interesting because in this day and age, it seems that politicians are very far removed from reality. They simply don't understand the level of joblessness on the ground there, the degree to which purchasing power in households have been contracted, and the amount of businesses that really feel either they have closed and they can't reopen, or by the end of the year, they're probably going to just pack up shop. They only reopen, try to sell all the stocks that they have still, and then close off at the end of the day.
And they don't see how they're going to get by. They don't see the prospect of any sustainability.
Right.
And if you have a business community that is unsettled like that, if you have the union community that is alienated from the process, if you have workers out of work, if you have families living with the consequences of that, we already have a significant amount of poor and vulnerable in this society. I mean, for God's sake, we've got to come with a national plan of salvation for this country, this economy, this society, or else we will have no future. And I wonder if the political directorate and the politicians, both in government and opposition, and in the parliament of this country, understand how severe the challenge is for Trinidad and Tobago. Would you like to take off on that, and then I will ask you some questions?
Yes, certainly.
How do you see the situation from where you are as an economist, as a financial economist, looking at the finance, looking at the economics?
Well, I think the country is really caught in a catch-22 situation. We're really between a rock and a hard place. Both the state, the private sector, and by extension, the citizenry as a whole. You see, let's look at the private sector's position. They would have been subject to not just one, but two lockdowns in the space of 2 years. And that, of course, would have, remember, the economy and their performance were already in a very anemic state even before COVID reached our shores.
Yeah, up to 2020, yes.
Yeah, correct, up to early 2020. So now, with COVID, that would have greatly, and the lockdowns, that would have greatly exacerbated their revenues and their financial stress, because their revenue streams and their cash flow earnings, not to mention the harsh impact it would have had on many households, because several of them would have been affected. Several of the members of these households would have definitely been affected by joblessness for quite some time, and that, of course, restricted their income earnings and their purchasing power of these various households. And let's not forget, many of them also have, both businesses and households, they have debt obligations to pay, they have other expenses to pay, like interest, they have rent, they have insurance, and the list goes on and on. So the quality of life would have definitely dropped when you have come out of not just one, but two lockdowns. And let's not forget, we are still very, very much in a pandemic. We are still under 40% vaccinated in terms of the population count. And I shudder to think of the possibility of there being a third lockdown if we were to have another surge in the infection rates. Let me put it to you this way. I just want to drill down into some numbers here to give the wider audience an idea of how bad this situation was and still continues to be. the data from central bank, that shows that when we had the first lockdown last year, we're not even talking about 2021, we're still on 2020 figures. In the second quarter of 2020, when we had that very first lockdown, the economic activity in the country would have fallen by about 14%. And when you look at the retail sector, which is where the bulk of the SMEs would lie, retail sales at that point in time fell by 17%. And when you go down even further, hardware sales fell by 34%. Household appliance and furniture sales would have fallen by about 8%. Textiles and apparel sales fell by 60%. And then you're looking at motor vehicle and parts sales, those, especially for the smaller companies, it would have fallen by 61%. And that is just for one lockdown. So can you imagine having to go through that, not once, but twice? So it is no wonder that the private sector is virtually almost crippled, and especially in many, many instances. Now, what does that mean on the flip side of the coin for the state sector, for the government? The government's main source of revenues, and of course you need money to be able to run a country, their main source of revenues is of course taxes. And let's face it here, nobody likes taxes. I would certainly think the politicians don't like taxes either, because when they have to pay taxes, especially when they're out of government or out of being an active politician, they're not going to like it, right? Nobody likes taxes. But the harsh reality is that all over the world, not just in TNT, taxes is the main source of revenue, which will enable government to spend monies and meet their budgetary obligations and provide the basic amenities for the public, better education, better housing facilities, better medical care, access to potable water, electricity, and the list goes on and on. Now, our fiscal performance over the last 5 to 6 years have been very, very menacing. From 2016 to 2020, we've had a fiscal deficit of about $48 billion. So that means we spent $48 billion more than what we actually earned in revenues. And if the central bank's projections are correct for 2021, then that means that figure is going to move from $48 billion to a deficit of $63 billion. Now understand this figure. This is a fiscal deficit of $63 billion. So that certainly means that the state is cash strapped. They definitely need money, especially in this rounds where they were still very much in the middle of a pandemic. It is highly expected that they're going to have to continue to provide COVID relief to those that are made most vulnerable in the country, but at the same time strike a balance whereby they don't, their policies don't damage the economy even further, restrict economic activity even further, and at the same time find solutions to try to upgrade and stimulate more activities and confidence within the private sector. Now, how do they go about doing that? Especially when it comes from a taxation point of view. We remember that you have to have a taxation administration, a taxation policy that is not going to deter growth, that is not going to discourage investment, consumptions, that is also not going to discourage savings and productivity as a whole. But by the looks of things, it appears that as each year passes by, Trinidad and Tobago, and partially because of our taxation regime and policies, we are becoming less and less business friendly and less investor friendly.
Yeah, well, I think that's the truth, and I think business is beginning to feel it now. And we have a situation in which investment outflows are taking place in Trinidad and Tobago rather than inflows. We have a serious problem, but you raise this issue of taxes. First of all, there is a revenue authority that the government is establishing. Is that a good move, or is there a better option?
Okay, so conceptually, right, from a conceptual standpoint, the idea of, call it revenue authority, call it BIR, whatever you want to call it, any entity, any tax administration entity that can plug those serious big holes that we have in tax leakages in the country is obviously a good idea, because we lose billions of dollars each year in failed tax revenue collections and tax evasion and avoidance. I think last year it may have been a very senior economist in the country, Professor Theodore, would have mentioned that the tax leakage in the country, due to misplaced tax collections or taxes that are not collected, it was in the vicinity of about $12 billion. But I believe that is understated when you think about other areas of taxation, especially taxes from the international trade arena, like trade misinvoicing, etc. But conceptually, organization that is going to fill the gaps in tax collection is certainly a good idea. But how do you go about doing this? That is where the problem lies. First of all, the Revenue Authority, as we know it to possibly be, is likely to be a combination or a hybrid of BIR and the customs, two public sector entities in the country, which, for all intents and purposes, there are many times that they perform inefficiently and they have their fair share of obstacles to deal with. So when you take into account BIR, for example, in the BIR, they are very, very understaffed for one. They have divisions that have probably 10% to 20% staffing. They have training and retraining needs, and they need to start incorporating some of the more contemporary methods. They could perhaps get IMF and CARTAC to help them with these training facilities, etc. But the problem lies where if you have a very low staffing, a very high labor turnover, so you hire some tax officers today and 2 months from now they leave to another job, then whoever else comes in to replace them at some point in time, they have to be trained as well. So this training is going to have a very big cost attached to it because of the very high labor turnover. They have to employ more field auditors, more tax auditors, revenue officers, start using better technology to monitor the tax collection process and rope in or capture more of those entities and individuals that have been flying under the radar and not been paying their fair share of taxes over several years. And of course, after COVID, partner with the Ministry of Social Development and the NIB in order to build a database and find those businesses that would not be operating within the Gen Tax system and start doing field audits, additional field audits, etc. Now, if you have an organization that is going to encompass the BIR, what sense does that make? Why not just fix the existing problems that are there in the BIR? Would that not be a lot easier because you already have an existing framework? You may have to modify some of the elements in that framework. There's no two ways about it. But try to fix what is existing already instead of creating a brand new entity, which is going to have a cost attached to it, and at the same time is shrouded with a lot of political, or the potential for political occurrences that will drive further inequity in the country. You see, any tax administration body, particularly in a country like ours that is so small, should not be afflicted or affected by any form of political influence. You need to have a tax administration body that, apart from not distorting growth by discouraging investment activities, etc., it must be transparent. Of course, it must be effective in taxing and collecting in tax collections, but it must be transparent. But at the same time, it must also not be an entity that involves itself with promoting inequity in tax collection and tax administration as a whole. And this inequity could very well happen if it is affected or influenced by the politicians. So a minister of finance, any minister of finance from any government, it doesn't matter if it is a UNC government, a PNM government, or a brand new party forming a government, it really does not matter. No minister of finance should have that level of influence over a tax administration body, be it direct influence or indirect influence. It is simply not right. When you look at countries like the United States, for example, they have the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, and that tends to be free, at least to the best of my knowledge, is free from any sort of political influence. TNT is very small. It's way too small to have a tax administration body that could potentially be marred with this type of influence.
All right, so you're saying that taxation administration should be free of political interference and influence. Secondly, it should be independent. And thirdly, we need to work with the BIR as we have it now, and maybe make it better, because taking two inefficient agencies, Customs and BIR, and putting them together is not going to solve a problem that it hasn't already solved. And finally, that you are saying that, look, we have a lot of information based on the COVID situation that could now allow us to widen the tax net without punitive action, but bring people into the tax net and increase government revenues, and that is what we should do. All right, that is a summary position of what you've said, and we are going to take a break.
I just want to add one quick thing there, because we're on
after the break.
Of...
Hold your thought
Sure.
for after the break. We have to take a break now, and we'll have you afterwards. Thank you.
Welcome to Lifetime Solutions, where you can trust your roof to us. Our services include custom fabrication, steel framing, roofing installation, on-site roll forming, roofing maintenance and services. Call 223-ROOF or 223-7663 for a quote today, or visit our website www.lifetimesolutionstt.com. Lifetime Solutions. You can trust your roof to us. Call 223-ROOF or 223-7663 for a quote today, or visit our website www.lifetimesolutionstt.com.
Your house is more than just a home. It's the new normal. It's your place of work, your kids' school, and even your gym. It's where you and your family spend most of your time. With over 43 years in the building service industry, let Magic Mist Services Limited take care of your home cleaning and maintenance needs. From ceiling to floor, interior and exterior, allowing you to focus on what matters most to you. Give us a call. Magic Mist Services Limited, your total facilities management solutions provider.
Welcome back. Brighter Morning with Boo. I am Bo Tiwari, and our guest at this moment is Dr. Vaalmikki Arjoon, and we are talking to him about, well, he raised the discussion about taxes, and we've been talking about the how we might go in terms of taxes given the Revenue Authority proposal. You wanted to add an issue, Dr. Arjoon?
Certainly, yeah. Now, the Revenue Authority is being touted as an entity that will be able to help the state collect their fair share of taxes, right? To be able to plug those leakages in the taxation system, which we know to possibly amount to billions of dollars each year. Now, if that is the case, and looking at the devastation and the fallout that COVID has had among households and the private sector at large, then then you really ought to not be thinking about implementing new taxes right now. Now is the time to fix your taxation administration, not necessarily implement new taxes. So it's very curious that there's a lot of talk about re-implementing the property tax, and there is a possibility, we don't know as yet, but we have to wait until the budget comes. There's a possibility of some other taxes or higher taxes being implemented in the coming fiscal year. But if you have faith in this new entity, this Revenue Authority, being able to provide you or to rein in taxes that you are owed, billions of dollars in taxes, then what is the need to on top of that, implement new taxes at a point in time when the economy has contracted so significantly, not just once, not just twice, but over the span of 6 years?
Yeah. What about this issue of property taxes? Are you opposed in principle to property tax, or are you opposed to it being implemented now?
Well, in principle, I have no issues with property tax, provided that when we pay our property taxes, we get value for money. And that goes not just for the property tax, but for all taxes in general. I mean, you have to really wonder, why do we have such a very high incidence? Why are persons motivated to not really pay their fair share of taxes, not just now, but for many decades in Trinidad and Tobago? And it raises the question of, do we get proper value for money when we pay those taxes? When those of us who are, God forbid, you get ill and you have to go to the hospital and you're waiting about 8 to 10 hours just to be seen by a doctor. Electricity is going is going and coming in your house fairly often. There are many places in the country where that still don't have electricity. You can't get clean potable water on a regular basis. You're afflicted with severe flooding issues. Now it seems to be happening in certain parts of the country every year. The list continues. And on top of that, you are paying your taxes every single month. Then where's the value for money in that? So as it now pertains to the property tax, now we know and we would understand that the state is aggressively trying to acquire tax revenue from wherever they can, because of their dire financial circumstances. And therefore, it certainly makes sense that they want to try to push this property tax now. But of course, now is not the right time to be even talking about the property tax, because remember, the income for many households, that would have taken a serious hit. Many of them would have used up a lot of their savings, especially those who would have been employed in the service sector, the hospitality sector, tourism, construction, etc. A lot of them have run out of savings, and many of them are still out of jobs for months on end. There would have been an IDB study was published last year, August, and they did a survey. And in that survey, they would have found that in Trinidad and Tobago, at the height of the pandemic last year, about 67% of low-income households were affected by job losses. And on the business side of things, in the private sector, you're looking at about 60% of low-income businesses would have been affected by closures. So their cash flows and revenue streams are very poor. And remember, they've undergone 2 closures in the space of 2 years. So against this backdrop, now they're being called upon to pay property tax, to raise their cost of living and their cost of doing business even further. Now, it's very interesting the way they're going about their property tax administration and collection at this point in time. What it appears to me is that persons are now being told, the country is being told that you have to submit your tax returns by November. If you don't do it, then you could be facing a fine of about $5,000, right? Now, really and truly what's supposed to happen is that Valuations Division, they're supposed to conduct valuations throughout the country using their field assessors. Field assessors that would have been trained, and they would, of course, the ministry would have undergone a big cost to train these field assessors a few years ago. They're really supposed to go out into the country and get the information, look at each property, take the information from each property, and then conduct the valuations exercise via the Valuations Division at the Ministry of Finance. But remember, now we're still in the middle of a pandemic. So it's very unlikely that persons are going to be going out there into the public to do this exercise. So it appears to me that this is why they want all this information being put in this tax return document. But is it one going to be a very efficient way of enabling valuations of these properties? Because you're looking at information that is just contained in a form. And secondly, the Valuations Division need to provide the valuations rule to the BIR or the TTRA, whatever entity exists at that point in time, so that the TTRA would then use the annual rental value and create the annual taxable value, which is a discretionary 10% below the annual rental value that Valuations Division would have calculated. Now, first of all, if you're doing this based on a form that was submitted by the population and the annual rental value calculated, it might not necessarily be accurate. It's probably not going to be accurate at all. And then, so which means that the annual taxable value is either going to be overstated or possibly understated. And from there, the BIR or the TTRA, they have to now send out the assessment notices to the public, but with a deadline of March the 31st. And that is what I find very curious, because we're still in the middle of a pandemic. Before the pandemic, things tend to run very slowly. and somewhat very bureaucratic and inefficient in many instances in the public service. And now that we're in the middle of a pandemic, is it pragmatic to think that or to expect that these assessment notices are going to go out by March 31st? I, for one, will be very surprised if that happens. And if you miss that deadline, if they miss that deadline, then via the legislation, they're not going to be able to implement property tax in the coming year. Now, when you look at the economics behind the property tax, in persons' minds, in the private sector's minds especially, when they know now that very soon they're going to have to pay a property tax, and it appears that those who are going to be put on evaluations roll first is going to be agriculture, commercial, and residential. Industrial have been left out of evaluations rule, at least potentially at this particular point in time, which begs the question, do they even have the staff and the resources to properly value the industrial property? But that's a separate issue by itself. But when the private sector knows that chances are soon they're going to have to pay property tax, again, less confidence, greater uncertainty about their future financial position, especially since their financial position right now is extraordinarily dire. It could very well, unfortunately, encourage even more tax evasion and more tax avoidance, especially since they're probably not going to get value for money. Remember, in principle, property tax ought to be used, the revenues raised from it, it really ought to be used for fixing our roads, our public infrastructure. If I walk outside and there's a pothole in the middle of the main road, then the property tax really ought to be used to fix that. It really ought to go to local government for better street lighting, basically better public infrastructure. If schools are starting to get dilapidated, you use the property tax monies to fix that, etc. Monies ought to go to the municipal corporations, which, as I understand it, many of them are starved for funding at this point in time. It ought to not go into the consolidated fund. But what we're being told so far is that these monies are going into the consolidated fund. And if it's going into the consolidated fund, then those monies could very well be used for things that the property tax is not meant for. For example, paying public servants' salaries, transfers and subsidies, or transfers to state enterprises, paying out for social programs, monies for social programs, using it for other capital expenditure purposes or recurrent expenditure purposes, etc. When it really ought to be directed solely for fixing infrastructure and the road networks, etc., in various communities and municipalities. It really ought to go to local government. And then thirdly, when you look at, when one considers that in this day and age, when the private sector is so resource-strapped and cash-strapped, it is going to discourage any entity from the private sector for wanting to invest more if they possibly can afford to. If I had a business and I wanted to say, increase the size of let's say it's a restaurant, and I wanted to expand my restaurant to try to attract more customers. But I know if I do that at the end of the year, I will probably have to end up paying more property tax. Why would I be encouraged to do that? Especially knowing that there's a great deal of uncertainty in the economy going forward. Why would a foreign entity want to come into Trinidad and Tobago knowing fully well they're going to have to pay property tax as well? Landlords could push up their rent as well. What about malls? Malls that have lost tenants that are privately owned, these malls. How are they going to be able to afford to pay the property tax?
Do you think that the government doesn't know what it's doing? I mean, I'm asking you a blunt question. Do you think really that the government has found itself in a situation where it doesn't know what it's doing and it doesn't know what to do, and the Minister of Finance is in that position as well?
Well, I think they know what to do. Remember, there was a roadmap to recovery team last year that came up with several plans for reinvigorating private sector activities and boosting the diversification thrust. So it's not to say they are bereft of ideas and strategies. This country has a lot of brilliant individuals. And if the state has no idea what to do, they can simply tap into the human resource, the knowledge element of the population. I think this type of administration, they're very guilty of a pro-cyclical fiscal policy, which is a terrible idea. This is not what we really ought to be going in times of economic recession, economic contractions, where people's lives are in disarray. You do not raise the cost of living. You do not raise the cost of doing business. This is the time when you have to step in and use the fiscal policy to stimulate more business through additional spending and reduce taxation and better financial management, better care when you actually spend monies. You don't just keep certain programs on the books willy-nilly and expect the economy to grow from that. You must have specific targeted programs, specific targeted capital expenditure in the country that is going to provide more productive jobs and raise the profitability of several of your state agencies. You might want to have some divestment of them, of some of them as well. But at the end of the day, you want to ensure that where the state spends money, their fiscal strategy is such that it creates more productive jobs, it keeps people employed, and at the end of the day, you build certain sectors outside of the energy component in order to raise that non-energy revenue and non-energy export revenue for the country. That is where the strategy ought to be.
What about monetary policy? Should not that
well, I think
be in just 1 second? Shouldn't that be in harmony as well with fiscal policy to allow businesses to be able to flourish by having access to capital, whether it is traditional debt financing, whether it is private sector equity financing, etc., so that they can find their feet and build some confidence in the economy?
Well, I think on the monetary sector part of the monetary policy, part of things, we've seen last year that the repo rate has been dropped to about 3.5% by the central bank, and they've lowered the reserve requirement ratio for commercial banks, which means that it would have had the effect of bumping up liquidity in the system. Since last year, it would have bumped up to about $13 billion at that point in time when they implemented that particular policy. Now, it's very, very bizarre, however, that the monies then now became available, but at the same time, the private sector, particularly more so the small and micro-sized companies, were not able to access those funds.
Access.
Correct. Right now, you have about $8.3 billion in the excess liquidity in the banking system. That is funds lying there doing absolutely nothing that could be put to more productive use if the private sector had more access to it. But and it's very curious that they don't, because now the government have said, and I hope they're being very sincere in this particular promise, that they are accepting all of the risk. I'm paraphrasing here, of course, but they are accepting all of the risk in taking when the private sector takes all these loans, so that if in the event they cannot pay it back, well, the state pays it back. Now,
the banks haven't even been given the guidelines by the government to proceed
correct.
With money.
Which is why I said I hope that the state is being sincere when they give that particular promise. But I must admit, I have my doubts about that. Because why haven't persons been able to truly and meaningfully access these loans? Now, yes, banks have standards that you have to adhere to. For example, if you're going out there for a loan.
We have to go now, Dr. Arjoon. We've reached 8 o'clock, and you're going to make me late. And my production staff is going to be very angry with me. So
we must continue this conversation soon then.
Yes, we have to continue this. We'll talk again. I want to thank you, though, for your immense contribution this morning. And I want to thank you, viewers and listeners, for listening and watching Brighter Morning with Bo. I am Bo Tiwari signing off, and we hand over to Chanel Al-Suran with the news.